December 7, 1941. 07:50 hours. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The roar of Japanese bombers fills the air, a sound that forever changes the course of history. The USS West Virginia shudders as it takes a direct hit, flames tearing through the deck. Amidst the chaos and bloodshed, one voice rises from the inferno: Doris Miller, a cook with no formal combat training. Yet he runs toward the anti-aircraft gun. He's about to rewrite history. Pearl Harbor was a place of complacency. In the early morning hours, sailors moved through their routines, unprepared for the storm that was about to descend. The naval base, one of the most strategically significant in the Pacific, seemed untouched by the war that raged far from its shores. Yet at 7:55 hours, the world would change. The Japanese attack came with a speed and ferocity that no one anticipated. Over 350 aircraft, including bombers and fighters, swooped in from above, raining bombs on the Pacific Fleet. Ships exploded in a thunderous cacophony, sending waves of fire and smoke into the sky. Sailors scrambled to their posts, but many were caught unawares, unable to defend themselves against the barrage. Amidst the chaos, a young African-American man, Doris Miller, found himself far from his usual post. He wasn't a gunnery expert. He wasn't even a trained fighter. He was a cook. Yet, when the bombs fell, Miller's instincts drove him to action. He had never before manned a weapon of any kind, but in that moment, something in him snapped. Without hesitation, he dashed to a nearby anti-aircraft gun, one that he had never been trained to use, and began firing at the incoming Japanese planes. His actions were driven not by military experience, but by a profound sense of duty and bravery. As the explosion of bombs rained down on Pearl Harbor, Doris Miller kept firing the anti-aircraft gun, each shot a defiant roar against the chaos that surrounded him. He was not a soldier. He was a cook, and yet here he was, the only one in his vicinity brave enough to face the oncoming threat. While Miller stood resolute, the battle raged around him. The attack lasted less than 2 hours, but in those moments, entire lives were altered. The Pacific Fleet was crippled. 8 battleships were damaged or sunk, and more than 2,400 Americans lost their lives. Yet, amidst the wreckage, one man's extraordinary courage stood out. Doris Miller's action didn't just have immediate consequences for the battle. It sparked a legacy. In the days and weeks that followed, Miller became a symbol of courage and resilience, an unlikely hero who rose to the moment despite having no formal training. What drove him to act when so many others hesitated or were incapacitated? Miller's actions did not go unnoticed. As word spread of the young cook who had manned an anti-aircraft gun with a courage far beyond his training, his name was soon carried beyond the confines of Pearl Harbor. He was awarded the Navy Cross, the third highest military decoration for valor, making him one of the few African Americans to receive such an honor at that time. But even as his recognition grew, there was an underlying question. How could a cook, someone with no military background, find the strength to rise in such a pivotal moment? What inner resolve propelled him to do something no one expected? Something that many men with much more training and experience failed to do? This question lingered in the minds of many. It wasn't just about the gun he fired, or the planes he shot down. It was about the human spirit, about the untapped potential that can emerge under the weight of extreme circumstances. Doris Miller was no different from many of the men around him. Yet in that moment, he found within himself the strength to take action where others might have frozen. In the aftermath of the attack on Pearl Harbor, Doris Miller was left with more than just recognition. The Navy Cross he received was a testament to his actions, but it was his internal transformation that truly marked the significance of his heroism. Doris Miller was not born into a world that expected him to be a hero. In fact, as an African American in the 1940s, the United States military had strict racial barriers, and Miller's position aboard the USS West Virginia was one of limited responsibility. He was a cook, an enlisted man who was often tasked with preparing meals for the officers and sailors, a job that carried little prestige. His role was humble, his training basic, and his expectations, like those of most men in similar positions, were grounded in routine. Yet, in the heat of battle, something shifted within Miller. It was not simply the courage to pick up a gun that defined him. It was his decision to act in the face of chaos, to do something far beyond the call of duty, to challenge the limitations imposed upon him by circumstance, training, and race. Miller's bravery did not just defy the expectations of a cook, but it shattered the larger societal frameworks that sought to confine him. He was a black man in an institution that had long discriminated against people of his race, and yet he was the one who stood tall in the face of a foreign assault. In the most dire of circumstances, Doris Miller was transformed from an ordinary sailor to a symbol of perseverance and defiance. His act of heroism challenged the perception of what someone like him was capable of. But even more, it raised a question that would linger in the hearts of those who learned his story. How often do we hold ourselves back because we doubt our own abilities? How often do we accept limitations placed upon us by others or by society? Miller's courage wasn't born of military expertise. It was born from the simple realization that when faced with the worst of human adversity, the choice to act, to rise above the circumstances, is not reserved for the trained, the powerful, or the privileged. It is a choice that can be made by anyone, anywhere, at any time. This is the essence of heroism. Not a moment of glory, but a moment of action when everything else seems to fail. Miller's story is one of the countless unsung heroes of history, ordinary people who, when pressed by fate, choose to act, to rise above, and to change the course of their world. As the dust settled over the smoldering remnants of Pearl Harbor, Doris Miller's actions reverberated beyond the confines of the battlefield. The attack was over, but the legacy of his heroism was just beginning to unfold. In the days following the attack, as the United States grieved its losses and prepared for war, Miller's name began to surface in newspapers and military reports. His act of bravery, firing the anti-aircraft gun and reportedly downing at least one enemy plane, was hailed as a shining example of courage in the face of unimaginable odds. But for Miller, the battle wasn't over. The recognition he received was not the culmination of his story. It was merely the beginning. On May 27, 1942, Doris Miller was awarded the Navy Cross, the third highest decoration a member of the U.S. Navy could receive for valor. The ceremony was a public affirmation of his bravery, a confirmation that a cook, a man who had been relegated to the lowest ranks of military society, could rise to the occasion when the nation needed him most. His award was presented by Rear Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, a towering figure in the Pacific Theater, who spoke words that would forever define Miller's legacy. This marks the first time in the history of the Navy that an African-American sailor has received such an honor. But it wasn't just the Navy Cross that defined Miller's heroism. It was the way in which his story was woven into the fabric of a nation at war. Miller, like so many others, had faced the brutality of prejudice and inequality. Yet in his finest hour, race was irrelevant. What mattered was his bravery, his resolve, and his willingness to step forward when others hesitated. In that moment, Doris Miller transcended the limitations imposed on him by the world. Yet despite his newfound fame, the path ahead was not an easy one. Doris Miller continued to serve in the Navy, but his legacy was not just one of battlefields and awards. He had become a symbol of hope for African Americans and a representation of the untapped potential within every person, regardless of their background or station in life. Still, Miller's story remained largely forgotten in the broader narrative of World War II. He would never be given the full credit or recognition he truly deserved. Yet his actions, his courage, and his sacrifice would continue to inspire future generations. And while the world may have moved on, Doris Miller's name would remain etched in history, a reminder of what can happen when an ordinary person decides to defy the odds. In the years following Pearl Harbor, Doris Miller's life was marked by both honor and hardship. The Navy Cross, while a monumental recognition of his bravery, was not the end of his story. For Miller, it was only one chapter in a much larger narrative about race, service, and sacrifice. After receiving the Navy Cross, Miller's life would take a turn back into the routine of military service. Though his courage on that fateful day at Pearl Harbor had captured the public's attention, the harsh realities of racial discrimination continued to shape his experience in the Navy. Despite his heroism, Miller was still a black man in a segregated military, a man who was often overlooked or dismissed by many of his superiors. He was assigned to menial tasks, not because he lacked the courage or ability, but because the racial structures of the time placed limits on what a man like him could achieve, regardless of his heroism. Despite this, Miller never lost his sense of duty. He served with honor, and in 1943, he was reassigned to the USS Liscum Bay, an escort carrier that was stationed in the Pacific Theater. The war was raging, and Miller's role as a mess attendant and later as a gunner was now crucial to the success of the naval operations in the Pacific. Yet, even as his country called on him again, the shadow of racial prejudice continued to hang over his career. On November 24, 1943, Doris Miller's life was tragically cut short when the USS Liscum Bay was struck by a Japanese torpedo. The ship was devastated in an explosion, and Miller, along with many others, was lost at sea. His death marked the end of the life of one of the most extraordinary and yet under-recognized heroes of World War II. In the official records, Miller's name was still often left out of the narrative of the Pacific War, overshadowed by the larger-than-life figures who had dominated the battlefield. However, Miller's legacy did not end with his death. His story, though relegated to the margins for decades, would ultimately gain the recognition it deserved. In the years following the war, Doris Miller became a symbol of the American ideal, a man who rose above the societal limitations placed upon him, a man whose courage and actions transcended the boundaries of race and class. Today, his name is commemorated on naval ships, memorials, and statues across the United States, a permanent reminder of the untold stories of heroism that often go unnoticed. December 7, 1941. 07:50 hours. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The sky is filled with the roar of planes and the screams of explosions. Amid the chaos, one man steps forward, his hands steady on a gun he has never been trained to fire. Doris Miller's name would, in time, become synonymous with courage, a symbol of the unsung heroes who rise in the face of overwhelming odds. But even as his story gained recognition, the world returned to its relentless march forward and history turned its page. The ship sank, the skies cleared, and life resumed its course. Yet the story of Doris Miller is not just one of heroism in a single moment. It is the story of the quiet defiance that exists within each of us, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The moment he grabbed the anti-aircraft gun, there was no fanfare, no grand expectation, only the raw impulse to do what was right. Today, as we stand far from the battlefields of Pearl Harbor, Doris Miller's legacy is still etched in history. His name is no longer just that of a cook or an enlisted man. It is the name of a hero, a man who defied the limitations of race, training, and circumstance to become an enduring symbol of courage. The USS Doris Miller, named in his honor, now sails the oceans as a testament to what one person can accomplish in the face of impossible odds. And as we remember the events of December 7, 1941, and the quiet, unwavering bravery of Doris Miller, we are reminded of something fundamental, that true heroism is not born of perfection or preparation, but of action. It is not about being the strongest, the most trained, or the most powerful. It is about choosing to act when others would hesitate, to step into the unknown when all seems lost. Doris Miller may have been a cook when the bombs fell, but in that moment he became much more. A man who chose to make history when it was his turn to stand. Doris Miller's name was not just that of a cook, nor merely a sailor. It became a symbol of something more. In the crucible of war, in the midst of terror and destruction, he stood not because he was a trained fighter, but because he was a man who chose to act. In the years that followed, as history unfolded and the narrative of World War II was written, Doris Miller's story would be placed alongside many others: soldiers, generals, politicians, each of whom played a pivotal role in shaping the outcome of the war. Yet Miller's story stands apart. It is not one of grand strategy or military brilliance. It is a story of simple, undeniable courage. It's a reminder that heroism is not always about being in the right place at the right time. Sometimes it is about making the decision to step forward when the world around you falls apart. It is about showing up when you aren't expected to, and doing what needs to be done even when the odds are against you. History is often written by the victors, but it is shaped by the choices of ordinary men and women who rise to meet extraordinary circumstances. Doris Miller wasn't a hero because of what he was told to do. He was a hero because he chose to act. He chose to step into the unknown when it would have been easier to retreat. He chose to defy the constraints placed upon him by a world that often saw him as less than. And in doing so, he made history. Today, as we look back on that fateful day at Pearl Harbor, we understand that the true measure of a hero is not in the medals they wear, or the recognition they receive. It's in the choices they make when no one is watching, when the world seems to be falling apart, and when the fight seems unwinnable. Doris Miller's legacy lives on not just in the stories told about him, but in the way we look at the world. His bravery transcends time, inspiring us to question the limitations we place on ourselves, to rise above the barriers that society constructs, and to step forward when the moment calls for action. We remember Doris Miller not just because of what he did, but because he showed us what any one of us is capable of when we decide that courage is greater than fear. Doris Miller's story stands as a testament to the power of the human spirit, reminding us that true heroism is not bound by rank or status. It is shaped by the choices we make when faced with adversity. In the darkest moments of history, ordinary individuals can rise to do the extraordinary, and Miller's legacy shows us that courage doesn't need to be trained, only awakened. As we look back on Pearl Harbor and the incredible bravery of Doris Miller, we remember that heroes are made in the most unexpected ways. And we honor the silent courage of those who, like Miller, have gone unnoticed for far too long. Miller may have been a cook by title, but he was a hero by action. His legacy, forged in the fires of war, continues to inspire generations to come, a reminder that we all have the potential to rise, no matter who we are or where we come from. And as the years pass, one thing remains certain: Doris Miller's courage, his choice to act when others hesitated, will never be forgotten. Doris Miller's story is not just a tale of wartime heroism. It is a powerful reminder that true bravery knows no boundaries. In the midst of fire and fury, with bombs raining down and ships sinking around him, Doris Miller made a choice. A choice that changed not just the course of a battle, but the course of his life and history itself. He chose to act when others hesitated. And in doing so, he proved that heroism is not defined by training or status, but by the willingness to rise above what is expected. Yet, as we look at Miller's journey, we must ask ourselves, what would we do if faced with a similar moment? Would we, like Doris, choose courage when fear grips us? When everything around us seems lost? Miller wasn't just a cook. He wasn't just an African-American man serving in a segregated military. He was a symbol of possibility, of the untapped potential in every person, regardless of their background, who has the strength to act when the world calls for action. His bravery transcended race, proving that anyone, anywhere, can make a difference, not through grand plans or prestigious titles, but by simply choosing to do what's right in a world that is on fire. But why is Doris Miller's story so important today? Because even in 2023, we still face moments where we must rise in the face of adversity, where our courage will be tested. It could be in our personal lives, in the fight for justice, or even in the quiet, everyday battles we face. Miller's courage is a beacon, showing us that the strength to fight, to stand, and to make a difference is already within us. We just have to choose to act. And as we reflect on Miller's legacy, we are left with one undeniable truth. History doesn't always remember the names of those who stand in the shadows, but the impact of their actions, of their courage, their choices, ripples through time, shaping generations to come. Doris Miller's name will forever be etched in the history of Pearl Harbor, not just as a man who shot down enemy planes, but as a hero who shattered the limits placed on him by society. His legacy reminds us that true heroes are not born from titles, but from moments of courage, conviction, and action when the world needs them most. As we remember Doris Miller, we are reminded that we all have the capacity for greatness. It's not about waiting for the perfect moment. It's about choosing to act when the moment chooses us. When your time comes, what will you choose? As we reflect on the courage of Doris Miller and the countless unsung heroes of history, we are reminded that these stories of bravery, sacrifice, and triumph, often remain hidden in the shadows of time, but they deserve to be heard. If Doris Miller's story resonated with you, then there are countless more untold tales from the World War II era, moments of heroism, tragedy, and incredible feats of humanity that shaped the world we live in today. These stories aren't just history, they're reminders of the strength within each of us, waiting to be awakened. If you want to uncover more stories like Doris Miller's, stories that will inspire, educate, and challenge you to think deeper about history, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Join us as we dive into the remarkable tales of World War II and beyond, where history's unsung heroes come to life. Hit that subscribe button and never miss a story that could change the way you see the world.